Thanks for checking out my customizable personal radar plugin. Before I start going over things in detail, I wanted to show it off here in the Lyra project. Yep, you can see my allies showing up in red as my team is red, and if I get a little closer to the enemies, you can see them appearing blue, and the rotation is updating to be accurate to that enemy's rotation, and the whole map turns along with my character as I turn. So yeah, this is just to show it in something other than the demo project. Since this is a plugin instead of a content pack, you may need to, in your editor, go to Settings, right on the Content browser, and enable Show Plugin Content. And now, either if we start up here at all, or we can scroll down here on the left side, go to Plugins, and we have Personal Radar Content. I highly recommend starting out in the demo map, as it's a great overview of all the features that this plugin has to offer. So there's a lot going on in this map. Let's full screen it. First thing to take a look at is the UI. There are 3 personal radars showing up, one in the top right, one in the bottom right, one in the bottom left, and they're actually all instances of the same widget blueprint, just with different parameters set for each one. If you want to customize it further, you can make your own version of it. We'll talk about that later. So let's just walk down the line. It's a very basic object here. It just sits here. It's an actor with a minimap component. And one important thing about the minimap component is there are a few different types. Some of them update only when you tell them to. Some of them update every tick, as is shown here. As these actors rotate, on tick, the minimap component will send updates to the minimap subsystem, and that comes through to the personal radar. So we'll talk about the minimap components more later. The important thing is you can customize how and when it sends data, specifically how often it sends data through the minimap subsystem. So as we go down, you can also set the size of icons. Here we have a little thing and a big thing, and the icon size is just changed. You can also change the texture or the tint. Here is a box. It's a white icon, but the tint is changed, and the texture is obviously a box. There's another way to do that too. Here you can see in the top right personal radar that all 3 of these icons are the same size. However, if you look at the bottom left personal radar, you'll see that the big box actually has a bigger icon. And the reason for that is it has a setting to change the scale of the icon based on the scale of the actor. So it just takes the icon size, which we configure here, and multiplies it by the actor scale. So bigger actor means bigger icon. As we push these boxes, you can see them moving on the map in the top right. It's kind of fun. Bear in mind it uses the actor yaw to determine the rotation of the icon if rotation is enabled. So depending on your game, that may or may not suit your needs. Easy way out is just do what the bottom left radar does and do not rotate any icons. Here we demonstrate a flashing icon. You can also set icons to hidden if you want a unit to be stealthed, for instance. Then it won't show up on the personal radar. So this demonstrates filters, and filters are shown on the radar on the bottom right. You can actually see that when there's no filter applied, everything shows up. But once we start applying filters for each unit type, and there are 3 unit types that come with the plugin out of the box, then only actors of that unit type will show up in the personal radar. So you can go in, there's an enumerator, you can customize these and add your own if you want to. The main thing to keep in mind is that if you use filters, anything that does not have a filter set, which is basically everything else in this demo map, will not show up on the personal radar. So make sure you set on everything the proper filter type. And finally, we have these spheres, which kind of get into the nuance of how the minimap component works. So they're actually very important, even though they don't do much. They just update every few seconds. And every few seconds, when they move, they just pop over a little bit, then they manually send an update to the Minimap subsystem saying, hey, I have moved, update my transform. And then that goes down the pipe to the personal radar. They are not updating every tick, like many of these are updating every tick. Those boxes, the spinning arrows over there, these just update when we manually send an update. And let's talk about that as we get into the Minimap component. Alright, so here I have these objects which have a very basic Minimap component, the most basic one there is. If you search Minimap component, then you'll see there's actually 3 different options that come with the plugin. The most basic one only updates on demand. So what does that mean? On demand, if we, on begin play, get the Minimap component and say update transform, then it will update itself on the personal radars. If we don't, then it will not show up on the radars. So, and these ones, as I mentioned, these guys move every few seconds. They also have some logic, so that every so many seconds, between 3 and 10 seconds, they move, and then after they move, they update the transform. So, again, this is the only time it's updating. So if we were, let's say, to put one of these over next to our player, and then play the game, you'll notice, okay, there it is. On begin play, it updated its transform, and then every few seconds when it moves, it updates its transform. But if we eject and move it, when it doesn't update its transform, then it will not update on the personal radar. And boom, now it moved, it called update transform again, and therefore it updates on the personal radar. We move it, doesn't update, doesn't update, doesn't update, doesn't update. Once this gets called, boom, it is updated. So this is the most basic component, and this is great if you want fine-tuned control over exactly when does it update. However, that is not always the case. We have these icon tests over here, which have a BP Minimap component auto update. So these actors update their rotation every tick. They don't call update transform, but the Minimap component itself, and I'm going to browse to that, right here under blueprints. The basic one is in native. The auto update and auto initialize are in blueprint. All it does is on tick, it updates the transform based on the actor's transform. So if the actor moves, then on tick, it will update on the radar the position and orientation of that actor. There is a third component that comes with the plugin, and that one is auto initialize. Very similar to the other two, except instead of just updating on demand, and it doesn't update every tick, but it does update at the very beginning of the game. So if you have something that does not move ever, but you want it to show up, you can put one of these on it, and then at the beginning of the game, it will inform the Minimap subsystem, hey, I exist at this location, and then the personal radar will show it at the proper location in the personal radar itself. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at the settings on these components. So we have this arrow test that has a auto update version. The settings are much the same across all 3 variants. We can set the visuals for the icon. So in this case I have this arrow set up. You can set it to any texture you want to, and then tint it. And I highly recommend using white textures, that way you can tint it, as I did with the blue boxes. They are actually, now that we've added this blue tint, these guys are light blue. You can see in the top right radar. And yeah, same technique is used on these boxes. It is a white icon, but with a blue tint applied to it. And I highly recommend that method, because then if you have things that change colors or units on different teams, then you can change the tint color to change how they appear on the personal radar. And that only works if you import a white icon. So anyway, moving down the line, have the color. I'm going to reset that. And then the unit type. I mentioned the filters earlier. This is for the filters. Default is the default. It will not show up under any filter. But we can set this to military, civilian, or building. And again, if you use this plugin, you can go into the source code and modify that enumerator to add more unit types, depending on your game. I just included these ones by default, so we can set it to whatever type we want. And then once we filter the map to military, civilian, or building, this unit will or will not show up. Hidden, this will simply hide the icon. Pretty self-explanatory. If you need to hide the icon for a few seconds and then bring it back. For instance, if a unit is stealthed and you don't want that stealthed unit showing up on the personal radar, you may want to set the component to hidden on that actor. And flashing. And flashing is what this orange object over here does. It just makes it flash on the personal radar. So now let's talk about the UI that actually displays this radar. As shown in this demo scene, there are 3 different personal radar UIs. They are actually the same UI, just with different settings enabled on each one. So to get to those, you go to Personal Radar Content, UI, and the widget itself is WBP Personal Radar. I recommend if you want to make really big changes to this widget, then make a copy of this, put that copy in your project, and change that. That way you still have the original as a fallback, and you can mess with it as much as you want. And to display it on this screen, in the test folder, there is a widget blueprint for the radar test HUD. So here, as I mentioned, there are 3 different instances of the personal radar with different settings. Let's go over these settings in detail. So the first setting is center actor. There's some logic to set that center actor to be the player, and usually you would want to have it as the player, but the center actor can be any actor. So in this one here, the center actor is actually set to a different actor. It's set to that strange floating object. And that is why the personal radar in the bottom left follows that object and shows everything that is near to it rather than near the player. But as I mentioned, usually you have it as the player. The other 2 are set to be centered on the player. Going down the line, the center icon is the icon for the center actor. It's just shown in the middle of the personal radar. So pretty self-explanatory. You can set it to any image you want and tint it as you please. Background image, just the image used for the background. Right now it's just a circle that is dark colored. The range is how far from the center actor, usually the player, that the radar shows. So this one up here has a range of 800. That's 800 unreal units, basically centimeters, so about 8 meters away. You can see things on the edge are about 8 meters away from the player. But the other 2, like the one on the bottom right and the bottom left, they have a much bigger range, so you can see things that are much further away from the center actor. This one has a range of 2,000, about 20 meters, and this one has a range of 2,500, about 25 meters. Next is the radar size. That is just the image size of the radar. The flash frequency, that determines how often flashing icons flash. So the default is 3 Hertz. If I take this and crank it up to, let's say, 6 Hertz, and then rerun the scene, as we get to that flashing icon, you'll notice in the other 2, it's still flashing as frequently as it was before, whereas this one in the top right, it is flashing twice as fast. So you can set it lower or higher depending on your taste. Enable icon rotation. That determines whether or not the icons will rotate. Not the center icon, but all the icons around it. So you can tell on the bottom left radar, as these arrows rotate, they do not rotate on that because the icons are never rotated on the bottom left personal radar. But the one on the top right has icon rotation enabled, So as these actors rotate and update their icons, the personal radar reflects that rotation change. Use center actor orientation. So this determines whether or not the whole radar itself should be oriented based on the center actor. So in this top right one, it is enabled. So the center actor orientation is used for the orientation of the whole radar. This bottom right one, it is disabled. So the center actor orientation is not used to determine the position of everything on the radar. So again, just in the scene, you can see in the top right, it is enabled. As the center actor, the player, rotates, everything else spins around it. Whereas when it is disabled, in the bottom right, you can actually see the center icon rotating as the player rotates, and everything in the world keeps a constant up position. And in the bottom right one, looks like facing that way is the up. However, if you look carefully, you'll notice that in the bottom left, the up is actually that way. And you can customize the up direction, the north direction, with this map up yaw variable. So in this bottom right one, it's set to 180 degrees, world degrees that way, and then in this bottom left one, the up yaw is 0, so just a yaw of 0 based on the world, which is that way. When you have the radar rotating around the center actor, if you have use center actor orientation enabled, then this variable does not do anything. And finally, we have the last two, adjust icons by actor scale. That is enabled only on this bottom left radar in this example. So you can see, again, with those blue boxes, on the other two radars, they're all the same size because the icon size is the same. But in the bottom left, the bigger box that has a bigger scale has a bigger icon. The icon size is just multiplied by the scale of the actor. Lastly, we have icon size multiplier. All that does is adjust the size of the icons as they are shown on the personal radar. So in the top right one, icon size multiplier is 1. Down on the bottom right, it's 0.4. On the left, it's 0.6, somewhere in between. And as we look at the scene, you can see that the icons are biggest in the top right radar. In the bottom right, they are much smaller. And in the left, the bottom left, they are somewhere in between. So depending on your game and your screen size and the size of your radar, you may want to mess with the size of the icons just to make it look and feel right. Alright, so that is all the options built into the personal radar plugin. The code is relatively clean. The variables, by and large, have descriptions, so go ahead, customize this to your heart's delight, and can't wait to see what you make with it. As a final note, I wanted to mention that I created this channel just for Unreal plugin stuff and game development related stuff. So if you want to see more of my plugins as they come out, go ahead and subscribe, like the video, and if you'd like to support me, I do have a Ko-fi page. The idea here is if I do make some money on that, I'll be able to release more free plugins as opposed to paid plugins, because who doesn't love free stuff?